many years, and like Jim said, we just recently retired. But I experienced some amazing things through my hospice work. So now I'm not doing that anymore. Especially, I have begun to do more readings. We just finished an Into the Mystic Psychic Fair up here in Port Townsend, and I really, really enjoy doing readings for people. And like I said, focusing on how...
I understand that this readings that you do, first of all, let's talk about the palm reading. That is kind of a scientific analysis that you can do with people's palms, I understand.
Correct. Yes, it's very factual. It's been a palm reading, like tarot and all the psychic stuff, has been around since the Egyptians and probably before, but it reached, there was in the 1800s and into the early 1900s, there was a great resurgence of interest in palmistry in Cairo, and some great mediums wrote very lengthy treatises on this, that, and the other, and there are a lot of good books on palmistry. When I decided to look into it, it wasn't hard to find things, and there are, people's palms are relatively the same. Everybody mostly has a thumb and 4 fingers, and they're divided into certain sections, and then like I said, there's a basic map of the palm, and so you learn what the basics are, and then gradually you learn how to find out what's different, which, is what's interesting.
Well, here's an interesting question for you. I've always thought about this. Does your palm print or lines change if, for instance, you believe in reincarnation and you come from different lives in the past? Would there be any kind of information in your hand that would be that you could pick up in that regard?
I haven't tried. We just kind of got into past lives, I'd say, over the past 5 years, Jim and I. And I've discovered 2 past lives that I'm very confident about and actually use day to day to help me in my life. So I haven't done that with palmistry as much, although, how should I say, you can tell people's history in this life from their palm by looking at most of their lifeline and their fate line. And your palms change over this life. My palms have changed over my life. When things happen, it's imprinted in your hand. Even the shape of your hand, and I'm not just talking about arthritis. Being a nurse, I can differentiate between what's going on physiologically and what's going on psychically. But yes, your hands change over time. And I can tell when people's hands have shifted. In fact, you can see a break or a shift sometime. And you can certainly see the discrepancy between the left hand and the right hand, if your left hand is the other way around, but your non-dominant, your dominant hand. And in fact, I can see how my fingers have changed, and I know why my hands look differently because of very specific decisions I made along the way.
Oh, fascinating. Let me ask you.
It's just fascinating, yes.
Can you tell whether can you tell the people's dominant hand by just looking at both of their palms? Usually,
yes. And usually when I'm wrong, it's because then they'll say, oh, yes, but I was trained to write that way as a child or something. Yeah, almost always. Your dominant, just like, again, physiologically, your dominant hand is usually larger and stronger because you use it more. And, they're a little, but when you compare the hands, if you can see certain changes, like certain gifts generally develop over time, although sometimes... how should I say? People learn entirely new things in the middle of their life that they really didn't have at birth. That's possible, too. Nothing is impossible, as we know. Go ahead.
Yeah. Of course. Would it be possible to determine people's predilection to certain things? Could you determine if someone has a musical talent before they even developed it?
Oh, yeah. A lot of times I tell people, I look at people and I say, whoa, you're a real artist, aren't you? And they say, well, I used to be an artist. I did this and that. And I said, but you don't do it anymore. And I said, well, no, I don't have time, or I never had confidence, or my mother told me that I shouldn't or couldn't do it, or, but you can see, you can And you can differentiate between graphic arts and music usually, or at least you can tell whether someone. Usually, okay. There are a couple of markings, and I haven't seen them often, and they're rare. But there's something called the music bee, B-E-E, and it's on usually the Mount of Venus, sometimes the Mount of the Moon. But it literally looks like a bee, an insect, and it's called a music bee. And when someone has a music bee in their hand, they have a gift like for perfect pitch and this kind of stuff. I think I've honestly, in all the years, thousands of palms I've read, I've only seen 2 perfect music bees. And one of them was on this man from this homeless shelter that somebody brought in when I was telling fortunes at Druid's Nook down in Olympia. That this friend of mine said, I met this man and he's so interesting. And actually, he had a UFO experience. He told Jim about too, but I looked at his hand, and there sitting on his Mount of Venus with this perfect music bee, and I said, my God, I'm so glad you came. And he says, I've had perfect pitch since I was a child, he said. I've been a musician, and he said, but actually, he says, music drives me crazy because so much music isn't in tune, which is probably true.
Oh,
and so, he says, sometimes the sound of music just drives me, but when I hear pure music, it's just sublime. Wow.
Oh.
Jeez. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, one last question for you at this segment right now, and then we're going to jump over to James and kind of pick on him for a while.
Good.
I just thought of something. You know those ancient handprints that you see in these caves or any kind of ancient handprint at all? Have you ever been able to pick up any information from some of those old handprints that people sometimes will discover?
Well, yes, actually you can. Usually, a lot of times there's a spiral or something in the middle, or else you rarely can read the lines. But you can certainly read the print itself, the shape of the hand, the lengths of the fingers. A lot of those people were extremely determined people. You can see their willpower and their passion in those handprints. Those are people that struggled to survive and it got themselves through simply by will with those big thumbs there and sometimes their dominant index finger as well. So yeah, you can. It's really fun to look at stuff like that.
Oh, I'll bet. That's got to be a whole other area of archaeology or studying of history that I didn't think about until you just started talking to me about, reading hands. That's fascinating. Do people have different lengths of fingers that can tell you anything?
Oh yes, very much so. Just really quickly. Your first finger, your thumb. A lot of the chirognomers, that's what you call palm reader, in about 1900, there was a group of them that only read thumbs. The base of your thumb is your Mount of Venus, which is your passion and your sexuality. Your middle phalange there is your judgment, and your top phalange is your willpower. And then you take the thing as a whole, and you read it with the whole hand, of course, but you can tell a whole lot just by looking at people's thumbs, whether they're dominant people, whether they're submissive people, whether they're shy, whether they're outgoing, whether they're impulsive, whether they're thoughtful, whether they have a very strong life force energy or whether they have kind of a weak life force. I know you, Michael, are very determined and also very logic and purpose-driven, and you have an extreme life force energy.
Wow. And I thank you for that information because it kind of comes home really hard for me sometimes. But you try to use those forceful parts of your personality in positive ways, obviously. But and do you? Let me just ask you this: are you able to, for instance, help people or read their palms at a distance? If they can't come to you at an actual session, are you able to do that with through the internet or anything like that?
Yeah, now they just take pictures of their hands with their cell phones. This is very handy. They used to have to run them on a copy machine or in olden days, I used to have people, put ink on their hands and make ink prints. I can remember my first husband and I lived in Illinois, and I came back to this area in 1987, which was before there were many cell phones, and I had a couple of friends back in Illinois, especially my friend Lori, who always wondered if she was dating axe murderers. And so whenever she went out with someone new, she'd make big copies of their poem on a copy machine and mail them to me. And I always told her if she suspected they were axe murderers, she should just quit the relationship right away, because
Oh man, that's even worse than stalking out people on Facebook or any kind of social media. That's really great. I like that.
But actually now, with how good cell phones are, if people take a couple of good pictures of their whole palm in their hand, you get such a close-up sometimes. I can almost see detail better from a photograph sometimes than I can in real life, especially in a poor light. So it's very helpful.
Oh, very interesting. And just tell folks how they could, we're going to get your contact information later, but can people actually hire you, for instance, at your website, those kinds of things?
My website actually is JoanneClarkson.com. I'm also a published poet, and our daughter Carolyn made that website mostly to promote my poetry, although my poetry work and my psychic work are linked, and my book There's Always a Miracle is advertised on that one too, but they certainly have my information. They can email me or they can text me or anything like that, sure.
Yeah. Well, tell us. And you can Joanne Clarkson, so we have that spelled correctly.
Joanne with an E, small a, Joanne Clarkson, Clarkson.
Okay.
Just like Kelly Clarkson, since she won American Idol, we've been much more easy to get in contact with.
There you go.
Exactly. Well, geez, we will get into your wonderful books, by the way, Joanne, as we get into the interview here. But I'd like to jump over here and talk with James just to kind of get some of his investigative background and how he, I know a little bit of the background story of how he initially got interested in UFOs. And, of course, he is now called the UFO Detective and has done lots of research in this field for probably over 40 years, I think. Isn't that right, James?
Oh, it's about 30-some-odd years. I personally can account for about 1,000 cases that I investigated on behalf of the Mutual UFO Network, probably about 800 that were assigned to me, and I assisted on numerous others. So I'm thinking over that length of time, it has to be right around 1,000.
Wow, that is a lot of detail work, I know, for each one of those cases, because MUFON doesn't just do a cursory investigation. Matter of fact, you were the Washington State Director for the Mutual UFO Network. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I was that for a number of years. I took it over from Larry and Marilyn Childs, bless their hearts. Larry passed on this last year, and we were very sorry to hear that. But they were two wonderful people, and I actually met them. I got involved with MUFON, which is not a bad story, because one night when I was on duty at Fort Lewis, of all places, I was in the military police station talking with the desk sergeant. I had what was called a 24-hour duty day. They would have one plainclothes MP assigned to work with the basically the patrols that were out there for investigative tasks of one kind or another. So I'm up having coffee with the desk sergeant. I look down at his desktop, which has a large piece of plexiglass, and I see this business card among many others, and it catches my eye because it says National UFO Reporting Center, 206-722-3000. And I thought, that's a little odd in an MP station. I had no idea what that was about then, and I said, well, what's that for? And he says, that's where we report UFOs. And I thought, well, okay, that's a little different. And I didn't do anything with that information, actually, for several years. that was probably back in 1975. I was discharged in 77. I decided to stay in Washington. I ended up working as a reserve deputy sheriff, and then eventually I got hired full-time by the city of Aberdeen. And along about